Hello everybody, my name is Heather and welcome to another video. This one is going to be a bit of a new format that I've never tried before. If you've followed me for a while or if you know me personally, you will know I am a big Agatha Christie fan. And just mystery thriller in general is one of my favorite genres. So I've been seeing these videos around. Quite a few people I've seen do them. I'll link some down below. I originally saw this concept, I think the first one I ever watched was from Carrie Can Read, but I've seen a few since then, of trying to do solve-alongs where we try to solve a mystery as we read it. And I happened to have an Agatha Christie that I wanted to read, and so I figured, why not film a video and see if I can solve the book? So today we are going to be reading The Seven Dials Mystery by Agatha Christie and see if we can solve it. This one is a Superintendent Battle book. If you don't know, Agatha Christie has several different main detectives. Superintendent Battle isn't like a main one. I think there's only 4 or 5 books with him, but this is one of them. The reason I picked this one up is because Netflix recently came out with a miniseries of this book. I watched the first episode of it and then paused and was like, I need to go read the book and then I'll come back and watch the show. This one is, I guess I'll just read the back so you know what I know going in-ish. I know a little bit more than this because I watched the first episode, but Jerry Wade had proved himself to be a champion sleeper, so the other house guests decided to play a practical joke on him. 8 alarm clocks were set to go off, one after the other, starting at 6:30 a.m. But when morning arrived, one clock was missing, and the prank then backfired with tragic consequences. For Jimmy Thesiger, in particular, the words 7 dials were to take on a new and chilling significance. So, jump into this. I don't know exactly how I'm going to format this. We'll kind of figure it out as we go along. Might have to pull the whiteboard out at some point. Really excited to get going on this one. If you've read Agatha Christie books before, you know the first few chapters are usually like, here's the whole cast of characters, and then you can kind of start diving into the mystery. So I'm going to start taking notes. I'm prepared to get my cast of characters, figure out the premise of this, and that should get me past the point where I've seen in the first episode of the show, and then we'll be able to start solving the murder mystery from there. But yes, welcome to a video. We're going to try and solve a mystery, put our detective hats on, and I'm going to go get reading. I have read 4 chapters, and I feel like it's probably a good time we've got most of the setup to explain to you the premise of this book. First of all, our setting. We are in Chimneys, which very first sentence, I immediately had to pause reading and go look this up. This has a prequel. So Chimneys is also in the book The Secret of Chimneys, which I have read, thankfully. And that one is sort of considered the prequel to this book. So far, nothing's really happened that I feel like you need to have read that one, but they do reference it. Mostly in that Chimneys was the location of the murder in The Secret of Chimneys, and there are some overlapping characters. So Chimneys is owned by Lord Caterham. Not sure how to say his name. That might be totally wrong. He owns Chimneys. He was in The Secret of Chimneys. And then we also have his daughter, Bundle. She has another longer name, but everybody just calls her Bundle, who was also present at the time when they did the previous murder in Secret of Chimneys. So those are the 2 who own the house. They're not really present for the first 3 chapters. They're not there when all of this happens. Then we have the Coots, Sir Oswald and Lady Coot. So Sir Oswald Coot and Lady Coot, who is this rich couple, started with nothing, got very successful in something. It hasn't told us yet. Not sure what he made his fortune in, but they are renting out Chimneys. They have been for like the last 2 years to stay in this country house, and they're on the last week of their rental. And they have a whole bunch of like guests there. Lots of who are from the Foreign Office. Not really sure what the Foreign Office is, but there's like this whole group of young men who work in the Foreign Office that are out visiting. I'm assuming Sir Oswald works in the Foreign Office too, like maybe they work with him. I don't know. And then there's also a few girls there. So to run you through the cast, our Foreign Office employees are Jimmy Thesiger, which was mentioned on the back of the book, Jerry Wade, or they refer to him as Mr. Wade a lot. We have Mr. Bateman, who is most frequently referred to as Pongo. That's like his nickname they've given him. And he is actually Sir Oswald's secretary. And then we have Bill Eversley and Ronnie Devereaux. So those are the boys. And then we have this group of people that they've just referred to as the girls. And we haven't gotten full names for them. I'm not sure they're going to be super important. I don't know, but they're Helen, Nancy, and Socks. So that's everybody who's like staying in the house at the time. We've also mentioned the names of a couple different servants. We have Treadwell, who is the butler. Very important to have the butler character in a murder mystery. And then we have McDonald, who is the head gardener. And then they also later on mentioned somebody named Williams, which we don't know too much about him. I'm not sure what his position is. And that is our cast so far in this book. There's a couple other characters that'll come up as we get going through this, but for the main part, that is our cast. Chapter 1 starts with everybody at breakfast, and you see Jimmy coming down, and there's this whole thing about how all of these young men show up super late to breakfast, and it really bugs Lady Coot. And then she goes and talks to the gardener, and this is where we get our first, maybe slightly suspicious character. McDonald the gardener is kind of a grouch. Lady Coot has this whole conversation with him where she's trying to suggest some things to him, and he basically shuts her down on everything. And she, like, it really points out how uncomfortable she is. She asks him if they can have some grapes, and he's like, no, it's not time for grapes, and basically like manipulates her into agreeing with him. Same thing with like trimming the bowling green and a couple other things, where he's like really just manipulates her into just agreeing with whatever he says. So he's definitely overbearing personality, a little sus right from the get-go. Maybe too sus. I feel like sometimes when characters are too grouchy, too grumpy, it kind of rules them out because they're too obvious. And then we get a whole thing about Mr. Wade, Jerry Wade being very late for breakfast. Like Jimmy was already late, Mr. Wade is even more late. And so Jimmy and his friends, basically all the boys except for Jerry Wade, and then the girls, make a plan to play a prank on Mr. Wade because he is like notorious for sleeping in super late, missing things because he just sleeps in for forever and like you cannot wake him up. And so they go out to town and they buy a bunch of alarm clocks to put in his room and have like this whole, like they have 8 alarm clocks to set off in the morning to hopefully wake him up and maybe teach him his lesson. During this whole conversation, we get it is like distinctly, Pongo is the one with the brains. And they mention this a lot of times. He's Sir Oswald's secretary. He's the smart one. And they mention this regularly. He's also very serious. He's not like super part of the group, but they keep pulling him into things whenever they need somebody who's smart. We end chapter 1 with them finishing up purchasing the alarm clocks. Chapter 2 starts with a bridge game. Lady Coot has been tasked with basically keeping Jerry Wade out of the way while they figure out where to put these alarm clocks. And so she gets him and as her partner in bridge, and then Sir Oswald and Pongo are the other team. I don't really know what bridge is or how you play it, so hopefully there's nothing important there. Then we get a whole scene of them going and trying to figure out hiding these alarm clocks. Back and forth, we get more references to Pongo being the smart one. Some other people say that they might have some brains, but really Pongo is standing out as like the smart one of the group. They decide that the clocks are too loud, and so they're going to have to sneak in later once Jerry Wade's already asleep so that they can then put them in his room. We also get an interesting comment while they're going through this whole process of deciding where to hide the clocks, where basically Jimmy makes a comment about how well do they really know Jerry. Don't know if that's going to turn into anything, but I feel like there's a few comments that Jimmy makes that kind of put me on alert. Everybody goes to bed, they stay up late, wait for Jerry to go to sleep, and then they go in to hide the clocks. They end up having Pongo be the one to sneak in because he walks like a cat and is smart enough to figure out what to say if Jerry does wake up while they're hiding them. Pongo goes in, he hides the clock. Interesting to note, no one else can see where he hides them. So from here on out, we are on to Pongo's, like, we just have to take Pongo's word for what goes on while he's hiding the clocks. Keep that in mind for later. That's where we end chapter 2. Chapter 3 picks up with the alarm clocks going off. They set them to start at 6:30 and they go off every few minutes. It's woken everyone in the house up except Jerry. And it's reached like 12 o'clock. It is noon, later than he's ever been. And they're like, where is this dude? Like, is he intentionally staying up late or like waiting up there just to like get back at us for playing this prank? And then Treadwell, the butler, comes in, pulls Jimmy and Ronnie aside, and lets them know that he sent Williams, again, not really sure what his job is, up to check on Jerry, and they found him dead in his bed. Ronnie and Jimmy are immediately like, no, that makes no sense. You must be lying. And Treadwell is like, no, I've already called for the doctor. You guys stay down here. When the doctor gets here, then we can go look at the body. And Ronnie takes it really hard. And Jimmy is kind of suspicious about why Ronnie is hit so hard with this news. The line in the book is, but he looked at him rather curiously. He had no idea that Ronnie was such a friend of Jerry Wade's. So we get this little bit of a suspicious thing of like, nobody thought Ronnie was that close, but he's like really impacted by it. The doctor shows up. We get Dr. Cartwright. He brings in Jimmy and Ronnie and basically runs them through what are all the possibilities. Let's see what you guys think. They have some definitive proof that the cause of death was an overdose of chloro. Not really sure what that is, except that it is some kind of sleeping medicine. And everybody is like, that makes absolutely no sense. He did not need help sleeping. But the doctor is like, we found the bottle and a glass next to his bed. It's very obvious that this is how he died. And everybody's just like, that makes no sense. And as the doctor is asking them about all of these things, Ronnie seems really adamant about it not being certain causes, and Jimmy is just like, it feels like he's got something to say, but he never does. Jimmy's puzzling over why Ronnie's not voicing his suspicions, and then they get to the part about notifying next of kin, and Ronnie and Jimmy happen to know that Jerry has a half-sister who lives relatively close, that's quite a bit younger than him. So they go to notify the half-sister, the two of them. They go and tell her, finally get out with it. There's this little bit of a weird back and forth about how well they know her. That part got a little confusing. And then she like gets the news and starts asking them questions. And this is where Jimmy says another suspicious thing. Again, Jimmy kind of has some weird comments that he's making throughout this whole book. And he comes out and she's like reacting. This is what it says after that. The incredulity, oh my gosh, I can't say that word. The incredulity in her voice was plain. Jimmy gave her a glance. It was almost a glance of warning. He had a sudden feeling that Lorraine, that's a half-sister, in her innocence might say too much. And why could she say too much? What does Jimmy know? What does Lorraine know? Like, why are we worried about this half-sister, like, kid sister saying too much? And again, Jimmy's just saying some weird things that don't add up. We're just going to tuck those away for later. On the drive over to the half-sisters, I skipped this part, Ronnie goes to tell Jimmy that he has something he needs to tell him. And then he says, basically they go back and forth, and Ronnie's like, I can't actually tell you. I've been sworn to secrecy. Never tells him. So we know Ronnie has some kind of secret that he's been, like, made a promise he wouldn't tell anyone. So again, Ronnie's acting sus, Jimmy's saying weird things. TBD on what's going on. And then they finally go in to see the body. And that is when they notice that all of the alarm clocks have been lined up on the mantle, which is a little bit weird. Like, who went and moved the alarm clocks? They both are kind of like, well, maybe it's just like one of the servants cleaning up. Then they realize there are only 7 alarm clocks on the mantle, and they had 8 in the room. So where did the extra alarm clock go? That ends chapter 3. We get into chapter 4, and we kind of switch to our other cast of characters, specifically Lord Caterham and his daughter Bundle. Again, they own the house where all this happened. It sounds like we're a bit later. They've had an initial inquest. They brought in an Inspector Raglan who does a fingerprint check. There's nothing other than Jerry's fingerprints in the room, which is very interesting because Pongo went and hid the things. It's like, I don't know. It feels like there should be other people's fingerprints, so why are we only finding his? That feels weird to me. Bundle and her dad are having a conversation about the murder, or not the murder. It's not a murder at this point, about Jerry's death. And we learn a few interesting things. There's several references to The Secret of Chimneys in this chapter specifically. From that experience, which I don't really remember what all goes down in Secret of Chimneys, but apparently Inspector Raglan was somehow involved, and Lord Caterham already does not think very highly of Inspector Raglan whatsoever. So we already have like a inexperienced detective that nobody really trusts researching this. And he kind of suspects that Inspector Raglan is making this into more of a thing because there was already a murder in the house. 4 years previously, Secret of Chimneys happened. And so he thinks that they're trying to turn it into more than it is. Even though all of Jerry's friends are like, this feels like there was foul play. We also get an interesting note that Jerry died in Bundle's room. And then we find out later in the chapter that they're actually moved back in now. The renting of the Coots is over. And so Bundle's back in her room where this man has just died. And she doesn't know him super well. She met him once. That's kind of it. There's also an interesting conversation where she brings in MacDonald the gardener, and she goes through and asks him to do all of the things that Mrs. Coot asked him to do earlier in the book, except she like forcefully puts it out there and makes him do it instead of letting him push her around. So I don't know if that's going to be significant or not, but I thought it was very interesting that she went through and asked the exact same list of things that Lady Coot had asked. We do get a tidbit right at the end of this chapter that tells us that the 8th clock was thrown out the window onto the lawn, and they found it outside. So add some suspicion to why the clocks were moved, because like a maid cleaning up wouldn't have thrown the clock out of the window. We also have gotten several comments at this point about how stupid Jerry Wade is. So I don't know what is going to come around to that. Bundle specifically says she did not fancy that Jerry Wade had been overburdened in an intellectual capacity. So no one's thinking super highly of Jerry Wade, which is very interesting. And then we get one other really important piece of information. She goes to write a letter to Bill, one of the people who was present at the time of the murder, and notices that a drawer in her like writing desk is jammed, which, remember, Jerry Wade was staying in her room while they were there. And she finds a letter that is based on the dates, the letter he was writing the day before he died. And so here's what the letter said. My darling Lorraine, which remember is his sister, I will be down on Wednesday. Am feeling awfully fit and rather pleased with myself all around. It will be heavenly to see you. Look here, do forget what I said about the 7 Dials business. I thought it was going to be more or less a joke, but it isn't. Anything but. I'm sorry I ever said anything about it. It's not the kind of business kids like you ought to be mixed up in. So forget about it, see? Something else I wanted to tell you, but I'm so sleepy I can't keep my eyes open. Oh, about Lurcher, I think... And then it cuts off. That's the end of that page. Obviously, there was a second page of the letter somewhere, but we don't have it. Couple things that Bundle notices are weird. What is 7 Dials? And he says he's so sleepy. Why would he then go take a sleeping medicine? So that's where we're at the end of chapter 4. We've got the setup. I'm going to jump into chapter 5. I'll read a few more chapters, and then I will catch you up on what's going on. And maybe at that point, we can start to make some theories. Okay, I have now read through chapter 13. And I have quite a bit to update you on. I'm finally to the point where I think I'm ready to make some theories. And so I decided I would go ahead and pause here. I'm also at a point where I think I'm about to get a whole bunch of information. And so I got a lot to catch you up on. I have decided that we needed a list of characters. I hope you can see this okay on camera. If not, I will like type it up and just replace that. But we have so many characters going on in this book. And so I've divided them up into categories that are kind of color-coded just to help you as we reference. Up here in green, we have the Foreign Office boys, is what I'm going to refer to them as. They're all kind of a part of a friend group, but they all work at the Foreign Office. And then we have Jerry Wade, who is our victim number 1. As you will see shortly, we have a number 2. This next category is the Coots section. So we have Sir Oswald and then Lady Coot and then Sir Oswald's secretary, Mr. Bate, aka Pongo. And then we have the girls. I don't think they're going to be that important, so I didn't give them each their separate line, but they get mentioned every once in a while, but like they're only important from what I can tell in that they were there when Jerry died. And then in red, I have anybody who is a like continuation from the first book. So anyone who's in The Secret of Chimneys. So we have Lord Caterham, who owns Chimneys, his daughter Bundle, George Lomax, who I don't think I've talked about yet, but he was at Chimneys in the last book, and then obviously Superintendent Battle, who is going to be our detective. And then in orange, we have the servants that have been mentioned by name. Now that I'm thinking about it, the housekeeper also was mentioned, but I don't think she's going to be too big. She was literally just mentioned once for purposes of getting an idea of who the new staff was. So we have Treadwell the butler, McDonald the head gardener. I will explain soon about the footmen. Those are going to come up later. And then I have kind of my miscellaneous. So we have Lorraine, Jerry's half-sister. I think I talked about that. He wrote her that half of a letter that Bundle then mailed to her. And then we have a couple more that are going to come up here in a minute. But jumping in with chapter 5, we pick up with Bundle deciding that she's going to head into London. And there's this funny little scene where her dad's like, oh, I think I'll come with you. And she's like, okay, but I'm in a hurry. And he's like, oh, well, if you're in a hurry, I am not coming with you, because she's apparently a terrible driver. And, well, maybe not terrible. She's a very good driver, but she's scary to ride with. And so he's like, never mind. Which does come into play later, because she's driving very fast, very quickly, when all of a sudden a man stumbles out from the bushes on the side of the road, and she has to swerve in order to avoid hitting him. But when she turns back around after she gets stopped, she sees him lying in the road, and she thinks that she may have actually hit him. She goes back to check on him. He seems like he's dead. Enter victim number 2, which I'll tell you who it is in a minute. She's pretty sure that she's just hit him with her car. As he's laying there dying, he tells her to get a message to Jimmy, just tell Jimmy 7 dials. And so she's like, okay, what is going on here? She doesn't immediately make the connection because she's stressed that she just killed a man, but she does later in the chapter put together the connection that she's seen 7 dials before. And she does know who Jimmy is. She is not sure who the guy is that is dying, obviously. She doesn't know who that is, but she does know Jimmy, she knows Bill, and she knows Jerry. And I can't remember if she knows Mr. Bateman. He's like kind of part of the boys. Like they went to school together, but he doesn't work at the Foreign Office. She gets this dead man into her car and takes him into town to see a doctor. The doctor starts asking her questions, and basically it comes around to that she did not kill this man. He was shot and died from internal bleeding, which is why she didn't notice anything. And so then basically the biggest question from chapter 5 is, why was this dude just out stumbling around on this deserted part of a country road? Where did he come from? Who shot him? What's going on there? Right? We have a lot of questions. We go to chapter 6. The doctor and Bundle go to the police to report that this guy was shot. And in the process of explaining to the police who this guy is, the doctor reveals to us the identity based off of something he found in his pocket. And our second victim is Ronnie. So we now have 2 of our Foreign Office boys, both dead with some kind of connection to 7 dials. Bundle decides she's not heading to London after this. She goes back home. As she's driving home, she starts to make all of these connections. So she's now starting to think about like, what is going on? Why is there this whole thing about 7 dials? And then she gets back home and she asks her dad if he's ever heard of 7 dials. And he's like, oh, I think it's some area, town within London. And then he all of a sudden is like, wait, I've heard that very recently. George Lomax, down here, just happened to stop by, and he mentioned, he showed Lord Caterham that he got this letter addressed from 7 dials. And let me find it in the book. I know why it sounded so familiar. George Lomax has been over. Treadwell failed for once and let him in. Which, by the way, neither of the Caterhams, Lord Caterham, Bundle, neither of them like George, and George doesn't really like them. I don't remember why they don't like each other. Maybe that's from the first book. Not really sure. Anyways, he was on his way up to town. It seems he's having some political party at the Abbey next week, and he got a warning letter. What do you mean by a warning letter? Well, I don't really know. He didn't go into details. I gather it said beware and trouble is at hand and all those sorts of things. But anyway, it was written from 7 dials. I distinctly remember his saying so. He's going up to town to consult Scotland Yard about it. So George now also has some connection to 7 dials in another negative thing. He's being basically told trouble's at hand, something's coming up, something's going down with 7 dials. And then the last thing we get in chapter 6 is this little tidbit about Wade and Lorraine. Remember his half-sister, not being related by blood. She's, from what I can tell, the paragraph was a little bit confusing. Jerry's dad ran away with Lorraine's mom, but Lorraine has a different dad. So it's not like they're actually half siblings. They're not blood related at all, which Bundle seems to think is really significant. I'm not 100% sure why, but that might come up into play later. We'll see. Chapter 7, Bundle then goes to London the next day, and she calls Bill. She has a connection with him, and she asks him if he knows who Jimmy is. He gives her Jimmy's address because she's determined to go and send this final message from Ronnie to Jimmy. We then get a whole scene. She goes and shows up to Jimmy's house, and Lorraine happens to be there. And so basically the rest of chapter 7 is her talking to Lorraine prior to Jimmy coming in, and they're kind of starting to compile their information. They start talking about this letter that Jerry had written to Lorraine that Bundle has obviously read, and then Jimmy comes in at the end of chapter 7. Chapter 8, we don't get an awful lot of new information. The three of them are in the room together. Bundle tells them the news, delivers the message. Jimmy mentions that nobody has seen Ronnie since Jerry died. And then basically we just get a compile information scene where Jimmy, Bundle, and Lorraine start just pulling together all of their information that they have. We already know everything already. Very little additional information, except that they do finally figure out what the letter from Jerry meant to Lorraine when he mentioned forget about 7 Dials. She said that she had accidentally opened a letter of his at one point that was addressed from 7 Dials. It was just a list of names, and he just kind of brushed it off as like, I have no idea why we're getting this. And the three of them decide that they're going to figure this thing out. They make a plan. We then go to chapter 9. We're continuing this compilation of evidence. It's decided that Bundle should go look into the servants at Chimney because she's the best person to have access to them at this point. They basically rule out various lines of investigation and decide that they are going to focus on Jerry's death because the police are already looking into Ronnie's. They know that there's no point in going and trying to figure out the 7 Dials thing, and so they decide to focus on Jerry because the police have ruled it out as a suicide. They're not looking into that. The other random piece of information that we get about Jerry is that there's something about him not having fought in the war, which based off of the timeline he probably should have. And all Jimmy's been able to figure out, he's been doing some digging, is that Jerry was out of England, and he's pretty sure, again, we don't know this for sure, this is just Jimmy speculating, but he's pretty sure that Jerry was part of the Secret Service and was stationed in Germany. He speaks German, he thinks all the pieces make sense, and that Jerry is not quite as dumb as he looks. We get a call back to that. And so maybe there's something more going on with Jerry than we think there is. They make plans to try and get into George's party. It was mentioned when I was talking about the dad, that George is planning this political party. They decide that they need to get into that party, and they all are trying to figure out how to go about getting invites in a way that doesn't look suspicious. And then they all go their separate ways. Chapter 10 basically starts with saying that none of them had given their complete information, and then it lists what we missed from each of them. For example, Lorraine was perfectly sincere in her account of the motives. Basically, it goes through like what each of them was hiding. And the main thing that it then goes on with is Bundle was hiding the fact that she had plans to go visit the Scotland Yard directly after they talked. So she heads in and she is like, I'm going to go find Superintendent Battle because he helped in this last case that happened at Chimneys. I'm going to go talk to him. And so she goes in to have a sit down with Superintendent Battle and pump him for information, basically. She asks him for a list of the secret societies in London, specifically in the 7 Dials area, which I guess I missed something. When Lorraine was talking about finding that letter in Jerry's stuff, he had made a comment about like secret societies. What if the like mafia came to London? And so then they get on this whole thing of the 7 Dials must be some like secret society. So she goes to ask Scotland Yard if she can get a list of any of the secret societies that they are tracking. And Superintendent Battle hands it over to her super easily, to the point which she's suspicious, and she's like, you know I'm not going to find what I need on this, aren't you? And he drops a piece of information that 7 Dials used to be the super run-down, sketchy neighborhood, which is what they've been thinking it is this whole time, but it's actually been torn down and is now like a rich posh neighborhood. Through the course of their conversation, Battle basically kind of agrees to let her help investigate this whole thing. He tries really hard initially to get her to like let it go and leave it to the professionals, but she's like, I'm gonna do it either way, you know I am. And so he kind of agrees, and then he tells her an interesting little snippet that she can get what she needs from Bill. He says, you know Mr. Eversley, don't you? She goes, no, Bill, why? Of course, but what? I think Mr. Bill Eversley will be able to tell you all you want to know about Seven Dials. And she goes, Bill knows about it? Bill? He says, I didn't say that. Not at all. But I think, being a quick-witted young lady, that you'll get what you want from him. And then that ends their meeting. So she then goes to have dinner with Bill. And that is chapter 11. She sits down. Bill's going off on some whole thing about this girl that is like an actor that he, I don't know, some story. It doesn't really give us the full details because Bundle just kind of zones him out. I don't know if that's going to be important or not. I don't think so, but it's possible. While they are there, she makes potentially the biggest discovery so far, and that is that Seven Dials is the name of a nightclub that all of our Foreign Office boys were going to while she was out of the country. And he's really dodging her questions about Seven Dials. It's kind of like a, oh, well, that's over. We've kind of run its course with Seven Dials. Trying to act like it's something in the past and she doesn't need to get into it. And she basically forces him to take her to Seven Dials. So we finally now know the location that everybody keeps mentioning. Anyways, they finally take her there. They go inside and basically the bouncer guy looks really familiar to her. And finally she clicks why she recognizes him. And it is Alfred, who used to be the footman or the second footman at Chimneys. And she's like, wait a second, when we left, he was still our footman. I'm not sure at what point he left. And so she asks him, she gets in a conversation. And it turns out that he only left his position at Chimneys like a month ago. So very recently. And then the other tidbit we get in chapter 11 is that there is a gambling place upstairs and they get raided by the police occasionally. And that's kind of what we get from chapter 11. Chapter 12 is basically Bundle finally starting to put all of her plans that she has into motion, starting with interviewing the servants at Chimneys. She starts with Mrs. Howell, the housekeeper. I didn't put her on my list again. I don't think she's going to come up. She basically just says, like, there's a handful of new people, not a ton. We then get an important piece of information. The new second footman is John Bauer, and somehow Bundle comes to the conclusion that that is a German name. I don't really follow that, but we have another interesting thing about there being another person that's German, which I guess I forgot to mention. I keep missing things. Back when she's talking to Bill, when they're having dinner, he gives her a rundown of all of the guests that are invited to George's political party, and essentially you have several people who are involved in like child welfare, and then you have Sir Oswald, who we'll talk about in a second, and then you have Herr Eberhard, which is some random German guy that nobody knows anything about, and Bill is like, I don't have any idea why he's invited to the party. So we keep having Germany come up. Jimmy thinks that that's where Jerry was stationed. We've got this random German guy coming to George's party, and we now have a German new footman. So I don't know where that's going to become significant, or if it is. And then she asks her dad, how did Sir Oswald make all of his money? And we learn that he made it all from still. And so she's like, this is kind of weird. Why are we having a political party that gets together all of these people about child welfare, and then randomly some German dude and a still baron? Something's not quite adding up about the guest list here. But we kind of move on from that. She goes to visit her aunt, who again, I don't think is going to be a super big character, but her aunt is pretty connected, and she's basically trying to use her aunt to get an invite to George's party. And that's kind of where we get in chapter 12. And then chapter 13, we get a lot more information. We're really starting to finally get some answers now. Bundle goes back to Seven Dials, dressed up in her incognito costume she took from her housemaid. And she goes back to Seven Dials to have a chat with Alfred. And she basically comes right out and is like, you're going to tell me everything about why you left Chimneys, who paid you. And we find out that Alfred was paid by Mr. Mozgrowski, who owns the Seven Dials nightclub. And he's He's Russian, obviously, if you can't tell by his name, but he came on one of their like tours of chimneys that they did, and Treadwell happened to be indisposed that day. He normally does the tours, which is a little suspicious to me that he just like happened to be sick that one day. So I don't know. Maybe it's nothing, but seems a little odd. Anyways, Alfred gives the tour. Mr. Moskowski stays behind and offers him £100 if he will leave his job and come be essentially a bouncer for Seven Dials. And Alfred's a little bit like, well, I can't just leave like right now. And Mr. Moskowski is like, that's okay. I have somebody lined up to take your job already, John Bauer. And so he's the one who came up with who the next footman was going to be. Again, it feels a little bit like maybe they were putting someone into place. She goes looking around Seven Dials, goes upstairs in the gambling room and notices a back door. And Alfred is like, yeah, that's the escape route for all of the rich people to get out of here when the police come and raid the gambling room. They go into that. There's like a back door into a little office looking thing, and then one of the cabinets in there is the actual like back door out. She notices that the room from the gambling into the office is soundproofed, and there happen to be 7 chairs in the office. So she quickly puts together that this must be where the meetings are happening of whatever the secret society is. Alfred happens to mention that he was told to like clean and get the room ready that morning, and so she decides that there must be a meeting happening that night, and she basically convinces Alfred to help her hide in a cabinet, and she's going to stash herself in there and hopefully listen in on a meeting. And that gets us to the end of chapter 13. A lot of information going on. This video is seriously going to be so long, but I have a few theories at this point. And so I thought now would be a good time before we get hopefully a lot more information as she listens in on a meeting that hopefully happens, of my theories so far. I have 3 potential theories at this point of what I think could be happening. We'll see how right I am. Again, I don't have a ton of information yet. It's a little tricky when you're following these like big crime ring ones. I feel like they're not my favorite Agatha Christie's, but my gut is telling me that all of this stuff about Germany is a bit of a red herring. I feel like typically Agatha Christie books make the main perpetrator, the main bad guy, be someone we know. And we just have not spent enough time on these German characters. So that's like my theory number 3 of like my I'll be a little disappointed theory is if she goes with that it's like some German crime ring thing that Jerry somehow got involved in and talked to Ronnie, and so Ronnie got involved. I think that's a possibility. It's not my top theory because I don't want it to be that. My number 1 theory right now is that our main murderer is Mr. Bateman. Pongo. That being said, I feel like there's too much evidence that points to him, and so I don't know that it'll be him. He is the one who went and put the stuff in Jerry's room, and that is the main thing, is that he had the most opportune chance to go and put the alarm clocks arranged on the mantle. He could have got the sleeping medicine in there. He had really great opportunity to be the one who killed Jerry. He also is running things for Sir Oswald, who's a very powerful man, but basically relies on Pongo to do everything for him. And so he has a lot of opportunity to be arranging all sorts of things within here. It has also been mentioned so many times how he's the one of all of these boys with brains. And so he's like the planner kind of guy, which again, feels like he's a little too obvious, but he's my like suspect number 1. So we'll just mark him as suspect 1 for now. Suspect number 2. One that I think would be a little bit more of a fun twisty, but I don't really have a lot of evidence to back up why it would be him, is Bill. I think it would be very interesting if it was Bill. Jimmy is kind of sitting in the same realm, but Jimmy's a little too involved in the investigating, so I don't know that I feel like it's him. But he's my suspect too. I just think that it would be interesting if it was somebody that was a little more involved, somebody that were constantly talking about being like kind of dumb. And I feel like that's been a big theme, is people are getting described as either you have brains or you don't. And a lot of people were kind of be like, oh, well, we thought that they were kind of dumb, but now we're seeing that maybe they're actually just hiding how smart they are. And because that's been mentioned so many times, I wonder if Bill's going to come around and actually have been the person orchestrating all of this. Could be a fun twist. And then again, my suspect number 3 is this like random German dude. I will be very disappointed if that's the one that she goes with, but it is a possibility. I am kind of in my mind ruling out everybody who is a repeat from book 1. I feel like they're less likely to be people. I feel like when she brings in repeat characters, they're not usually the murderers. Also, half of them are like doing the detective work anyways. The other person that I think is a little suspicious right now is Lorraine. Not enough to where I think I'm going to put her on my suspect list. Her and Jimmy are a little bit safe in my mind because they are helping with the investigating. But I do think I could come back around to suspecting one of them. So this is my list so far heading into chapter 14. I'm going to go do some more reading and I will come back and update you when I have some more information. All right, I have many updates for you. I am now through chapter 23. So I've read another 10 chapters or so. This lighting is probably going to get progressively worse as we go through this video. Just forewarning you, I'm going to try and finish this book tonight. And we'll see how it goes. Again, sorry if you can't read this. I really can't tell from here if you can read what's on this whiteboard or not. I will figure out a way to edit it in if you can't. I'm just going to dive into catching you up and then we'll talk about my new theories because things have changed a bit. Chapter 14, we begin with a bundle in a closet, in a cabinet more accurately, preparing to eavesdrop on a meeting that is supposedly going to happen. And luckily for her, it does indeed occur. She's in the cabinet for several hours and then some people can finally show up. And first of all, it's just our Mr. Mozkarovsky, who is like the owner of Seven Dials, and he comes in and is like getting it prepped. She's watching through the little peephole she drilled in the closet or in like the cabinet door. He puts on a mask and this mask looks like a clock. And everybody else who shows up for the meeting, there's 3 other people, are also wearing masks with clocks all set to different times. And they refer to each other as like 1 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 4 o'clock, right? And so she's listening on this meeting. She's not sure who any of them are. There's like several of them have very distinct accents. Most of them are foreign from England where this is set. There's some interesting things that are said during this meeting. So let me refer to my notes. But first of all, none of them know who 7 o'clock is, and 7 o'clock is like the head of the secret organization. So he's a mystery to everyone. It sounds like it's a guy though, but maybe that's just an assumption that I'm making, but I feel like they acted like it was a guy. They also mention that they haven't heard from 2 o'clock about an update on chimneys, which obviously leads us to be suspicious of who at Chimneys is 2 o'clock. But then later in the conversation, they specifically mention by name our John Bauer and how he should have intercepted the letter before Bundle could send it to Lorraine. And then there's a whole little thing about, well, we're going to have to take care of them now, which isn't looking too good for Bundle. They get talking about Mr. George Lomax's party that we know is happening later, his political party that Bundle and her friends are trying to get invited to. And they pull out house plans and a guest list. And they start walking through like plans about this party. And we learn that Eberhard, our German invitee that nobody knows what's up, is an inventor who has developed some kind of really awesome technology that is supposed to revolutionize airplanes, essentially. And it could be worth millions, if not more. They're obviously planning something to happen at this party. Other things that are mentioned, again, they know about this letter that Bundle found. They talk about that for a bit. They talk about the upcoming inquest the next day about Ronnie's death, where they have sent out false reports about lads practicing rifle shooting and are trying to basically get it dismissed as an accident. And then they end the meeting talking about 1 o'clock, who's the one woman in the room, playing the part of Anna. And we don't know when that part is going to come up. We just know that at some point she will be playing a character named Anna. And that ends chapter 14. Well, I guess chapter 14 technically ends with Bundle getting out of the cabinet and going home. Chapter 15 is Ronnie's inquest into his death. Not a ton happens at the inquest. We kind of really brush over it. Really, Ronnie's death is giving us nothing as far as clues and solving this thing. Very unhelpful, which I don't know what that says. Like, could this actually end up being like a really important thing? Probably. We'll see. Bundle ends up riding from London out to Chimneys with Jimmy so that she can catch him up on everything she learned while hiding in the cabinet. Ronnie's death is ruled death by misadventure. That's pretty much all we get about the inquest. Jimmy calls Lorraine and tells her that she really needs to be careful. He's worried about how this is going to go down. And then he asks his butler to go and buy him a gun. And that's pretty much the only things that happen in chapter 15. Pretty uneventful. Chapter 16, we finally get to George's political party. Not a ton happens. They just kind of do introductions and stuff like that. And then Bundle comes down from getting dressed for the party that night and runs into Superintendent Battle, very poorly disguised as a footman. And she's kind of like, I feel like your disguise is not really helping. And he was like, that's the whole point. The goal is for people to realize that there is an undercover policeman here so that nothing happens. He's trying to make sure that nothing goes wrong and we can just avoid all the issues. He's less concerned about like catching people at this point. Bundle's excuse to try and join the party was that she really wanted to meet a Mrs. McCotta, who's one of the people that was invited to that from like a child welfare standpoint. And they get a call that she's no longer able to make it because her children have mumps. I'm not sure if that's going to be something, but it seems a little suspicious that would happen. And I'll mention later why I think that's so suspicious, but we'll get to it. We also get a little snippet about this countess, who I've added down to the bottom of our character list because she becomes more and more a thing. I don't remember her name. She's supposed to be from is she from Hungary? Something like that. Some Eastern European country, and she's supposed to be somebody who's there also to talk about like child welfare, that kind of thing. And Bill takes her on a tour of the house, and he's like, she really asked a lot of questions about this. And that's kind of where we end with chapter 16. Chapter 17, Bill, Jimmy, and Bundle all meet in the library. They kind of discuss some stuff, make a plan. Bill and Jimmy decide that they're going to split up and take turns watching the house. At this point, we have discovered that this whole party is basically a cover for Sir Oswald and George and a couple other government official people to take a look at Mr. Eberhard's invention and potentially buy it for the English government, right? This deal's all really hush-hush because Mr. Eberhard is from Germany and he apparently originally offered it to the Germans. They found a flaw in his design, were really rude about it, and so now he doesn't want them to get it. And so he's trying to give it to them. But again, as mentioned before, this could be worth millions. And so everybody kind of needs to keep it under wraps. It's kind of this like top secret deal going down, and the party's just a cover for them to do this deal. Because we now know that Seven Dials secret organization is interested in it, they have a feeling something's going down that night before the formula gets into the hands of the minister, who's then going to take it and the deal will be done. Because of this, at this point, I have officially ruled out Mr. Eberhard as being our like murderer mastermind. He seems like he just happens to be there. We've kind of cleared up all of the air of suspicion around him, so we're gonna go ahead and take him off the suspect list. Also at this point, I think I'm going to go ahead and remove Bill from my suspect list. I feel like he just is getting a little too involved in the investigation side of things, and I think as we see more of him, I'm realizing that he's maybe just dumb and not plain dumb. He seems like a great guy. But he is no longer somebody that I could see masterminding this whole thing, especially now that we are like fully into secret society mode. I just don't see Bill being 7 o'clock. Chapter 18 is where things start to get really interesting. We get the events of this night at this party from a whole bunch of different point of views for us to see all of the different ways that things interconnect. So we take the same couple hours at night, like roughly 12:30 a.m. to like 2:30. Like those couple of hours, we're kind of following several different people throughout that time period. And this is where I feel like I can really start to make some theories because we have a timeline of people's precise movements and who was where for a lot of the cast. Chapter 18 starts with Jimmy's movements during those 2 hours. Jimmy and Bill, again, decided to split up watches. Jimmy takes the first watch, and he goes and sets himself up outside of the door of the guy who currently has the formula. It's like the air minister guy. So he's sitting outside of there. This dude's room happens to connect to another person's room who's not really super an important character, I don't think. He doesn't get talked about a bunch. But Jimmy hears someone walking around downstairs. So he goes to investigate, finds a window open in the library. Checks around the library, there's nobody there, so he locks the window to the library and then goes and locks the door to the library with him in it. And then right around then, he decides to pull his gun out that he went and had his butler get him, and he's kind of like standing watch right as the clock is chiming 2 o'clock. We then get to chapter 19 where we are following Bundle, again flashing back to like 12:30. She, in the conversation with Bill and Jimmy, they kind of were like, you just go to bed and let us handle this. And she's like, absolutely not. And so she goes and climbs out the window, down the ivy. She's sneaking around to like where the main terrace is outside of the library and runs into none other than Superintendent Battle, who tells her, go back to your room, which she does. He is like, I'm trying to deter anything crazy happening. You need to go get out of my way, essentially. But she goes back to her room and is like, just because I can't be outside where Superintendent Battle is watching doesn't mean I can't be investigating things. So she goes out to check on Jimmy and notices that he's not in his post, which is suspicious. While she's in the hallway, she happens to notice that the door handle to the minister's room, again, who has the formula, turns, but nobody ever comes out. Not sure exactly what that is quite yet. Goes to get Bill because she's like, Jimmy's not in his post, something must have happened. Can't find him in his room. Is like looking around, all of a sudden realizes she's not in Bill's room, she's in the Countess's room, which is also empty. So where's the Countess? We're not sure. Hears a noise in the library, goes downstairs, shakes the door. It's locked because Jimmy already locked it. And then she hears 2 shots. And that's where chapter 19 ends. Chapter 20, you would think, would be Bill's point of view, but no, we're jumping to Lorraine. Lorraine has been sitting here stewing that everybody has been telling her to stay out of it, and she gets up in the middle of the night, takes her pistol, and drives to the building where they're having this party, sneaks onto the premises, is walking up to the building onto this terrace that we keep mentioning outside of the library, when a brown, like, packet folder drops to her feet from a window above. She picks it up, looks up to see where it came from, and sees a guy climbing out the window down the, like, ivy on the side. And so she takes off running and runs smack dab into Superintendent Battle. They then hear the 2 shots, go running back to the library, where they find Jimmy hanging out of the window in a pool of blood. Lorraine immediately starts freaking out that he's dead. Superintendent Battle is like, I think he's actually okay. He's just passed out. He just got shot in the arm. So he's okay. Superintendent Battle really wants to take a second to look around, but a bunch of people are banging on the doors. They're like, let us in. George comes and is like, let me into my library. And so finally they let him open. Everybody comes in. There's chaos for a minute. Finally, actually, Mr. Bateman goes and gets everybody and is like, hey, we should go check on the air secretary who had the formula. Once they've established that the formula was safe, it did not get stolen. They go up and find that he has been drugged. He's like fully asleep. They go to get the doctor. People finally mostly disperse. Then we get to chapter 21. We finally start to get some answers because enough people have left that we can finally actually talk. People go to get a doctor for the air minister. And then Sir Oswald shows up from outside. Like he comes up on the terrace and he's like holding a gun and is like, I found this on the lawn. And everyone's a little bit like, what were you doing outside? Like, why were you out there to find the gun? Seems a little odd that you're just like out on the lawn at 2 a.m. Like, for what purpose? And then he's like asking Superintendent Battle what he thinks, and Superintendent Battle is like, I think there's way too much ivy in this place. There's some on your coat, by the way. So has Sir Oswald been climbing out windows? I don't know. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy to do that. Sir Oswald gets sent off to go do something. Superintendent Battle is like interrogating Jimmy on exactly what went down. Tell me everything. Was the library really empty? And Jimmy's like, yes, it was. And then Superintendent Battle goes and looks behind, and like the first shelf he looks behind, he finds the Countess passed out on the floor. They're trying to revive her. As they're trying to revive her, Superintendent Battle happens to make a comment to Lorraine that he thinks the packet that fell down was actually thrown to her intentionally because someone thought she was someone else. I'm assuming he means the Countess, but could be wrong on that one. Chapter 22, we finally get the Countess's story, and it is highly suspect. I don't believe a word she says. She says that she couldn't sleep because Bundle found her bed untouched. Like, she never went to bed. She was like, I couldn't sleep. Something just felt off. I tried to read the books in my room. None of those looked interesting. So I went down to the library and they're like, why didn't you turn the light on? And she was like, oh, well, I had my flashlight, so I just figured I'd use that. And then they're like, why were you sneaking around? And she's like, well, I obviously didn't want to wake everyone up. And then she heard somebody sneaking around the library, so she turned her flashlight off and she hid, which we know is Jimmy. And then two people looked like they were gonna like were attacking each other. She thinks she gets almost hit by a bullet and passes out, right? So goes her story. Superintendent Battle pretty quickly finds that it's just a casing that happened to hit a bookshelf near her, and because it was dark and there were no lights, presumably she could have mistaken that for a bullet. Anyways, she's like acting all dramatic. Bill is like fawning over her because he just like is taken in by any beautiful woman, and he like goes to take her upstairs to her room. Bundle is kind of following them, and she happens to notice a very interesting mole on the back of the Countess, which is important because when she was hiding in the cabinet, the one female, whatever number o'clock she was, that was at the meeting, had her back sitting to where Bundle was in the cabinet, and she had that same mole on her back. So Bundle then goes and grabs Superintendent and is like, we need to talk. And she catches him up on everything that went down, and he is just like, oh my gosh, why do I let you young kids go running around doing this thing? Why did none of these boys stop you? And she was like, are you kidding me? I didn't tell them I was gonna go do it. Obviously I'm not that dumb to tell them, or they'd try to stop me. Anyways, he's like, nevertheless, good work. A mole isn't really something we can like go off of. And then he makes some comment about leaving some people alone in order to catch bigger things. And so from that, I'm guessing that he's like, yeah, okay, the Countess is probably involved, but we're not going to touch her for right now because she might lead us to whoever's really in charge of this thing. So he tells Bundle to leave the Countess alone. And then we get to chapter 23. The next morning, or like a few hours later, Superintendent Battle gets George, Jimmy, and Sir Oswald in the library, and he's trying to recreate the crime. And he's been doing some digging. He's found some evidence. He found where the different bullets hit because there were 2 shots. There's a weird scene where Lady Coot comes in and like makes Sir Oswald drink some medicine. I don't know. And then there's a line in there where it says something about her walking out like she was holding the like bottle that she had just used to poison someone or something like that. So see how long Sir Oswald lasts. Sir Oswald left through the library when he went for his walk, so that's why Jimmy found the window open. Superintendent Battle suggests he basically tells them that he's pretty sure the thief didn't go running away off of the porch because it just logistically doesn't make sense. Like, he was there within 30 seconds. He wasn't that far away. They didn't see any sign of the thief. So he's like, either he is like an insane runner or he climbed back upstairs after he had his scuffle with Jimmy. So Superintendent Battle is clearly suspecting someone on the inside. George is like horrified at the idea that one of his servants might have done something. Superintendent Battle is obviously, he's like, don't worry, it's not your servants. He's clearly suspecting someone at the party. The other interesting piece of information that Superintendent Battle finds is a glove in the fireplace that is partially burnt. Not sure if it means anything or not yet, but an interesting piece of evidence. And then we end chapter 23 with Bundle coming in to say that her dad has called and he wants her to come home. He's very concerned because John Bauer, their new footman, is missing, which we know he was already a suspect to begin with. So that's where I'm at. You guys are caught up on the information. Let's talk my theories. Again, I've ruled a few people out at this point of no longer being on my suspect list. I still think it could be Mr. Bateman, Pongo. I think he has the makings of a criminal mastermind. I think he could be our 7 o'clock. I'm going to stand by that one. I think it could be him. The other people that I'm starting to really suspect are the Coots. There's just some weird stuff going on with them. And I don't know if I feel like it's Sir Oswald or a Lady Coot or a combo of the both, but I feel like between the two of them, we've got my suspect number 2. I think any of the boys up there, Jimmy and Bill, are pretty much ruled out. I don't think it's Lorraine. But I don't know. I feel like she's just still a little suspicious to me. I could see it being Lorraine. And that it wasn't actually a mistake that the folder got thrown to her. That it really was her that was supposed to be meet up, and she went running, and then when she ran into superintendent battle, she decided to play dumb. Could see that. I'm not going to put her on my official suspect list, but there's just something about her. And I feel like Bundle has mentioned something several times. I also feel like the fact that everybody talked about 7 o'clock as a guy makes me think that maybe it's going to be a girl. And I could see Lorraine pulling it off. I don't think it's any of our other girls. I also think it'd be really interesting if little motherly Lady Cooch ended up being 7 o'clock. John Bauer, the new footman, is clearly up to something, and so is the Countess, but I don't know that I feel like they're the masterminds behind this. I feel like they are accomplice 1 and 2, maybe. I think for sure that they have something to do with it. Countess definitely does. I don't think the Countess is who she really says she is. I think, again, Bundle connected her with the person. I think that maybe this Countess is the Anna character that she was supposed to be playing. I think there's a whole little part where somebody mentions that maybe she's not who she says she is. I think it's when Bundle brings up the thing, and everybody's like, or Superintendent Battle's like, but we verified, like, with the embassy, and Bundle's like, well, maybe, like, she's taken her identity, which is where I think that potentially the whole mumps thing becomes important, because if both the Countess and that Mrs. Marcotta, whatever her name was, were involved in child welfare causes, there's a chance they've met before. So, if the Countess has been replaced with somebody, Mrs. Marcotta probably would have been the most likely person to be able to identify her at the party. Which means that they could have intentionally somehow held her up so that she couldn't make it to the party, regardless of whether it's actually mumps or something else is happening. I could see this Seven Dials organization having intentionally made it so she couldn't show up so that they could replace the Countess with someone with like their inside person. That's my theory on what happened there. I think it is significant that Miss Marcotta was not there. I think the Countess has been replaced. And I think she's an accomplice, but she's not the mastermind. I think ultimately, in order to consider this thing solved, we have to figure out who 7 o'clock is, who's running Seven Dials. I also have yet to figure out why Jerry and Ronnie were killed. Like, what's the tie-in? How did they know too much? How were they involved? I think maybe Bill has a little bit left to tell us. Maybe not. But clearly something was happening over the previous year or two while Bundle was out of the country, that they were going to Seven Dials. How did they get mixed up in this? Why did Jerry have an envelope with a list of names and addresses? Was that what it was? Names and addresses? Like, how was he involved in Seven Dials? Are they a couple of the missing numbers? But I feel like they talked about them as if they were just too close, like they just knew too much. So if they were members of the Seven Dials, then that wouldn't make sense. So what were Jerry and Ronnie do? Were they somehow involved in the whole patent thing? Like maybe the Foreign Office is involved in that? I guess it could come back to, is Jerry Wade really a Secret Service agent? So yeah, those are the questions I still have. Maybe we should write these down. I feel like to consider this solved, I need to figure out a few things. I need to figure out who is 7 o'clock, because I feel like that's who's behind all of this. What did Jerry and Ronnie know? And I feel like those are the two main questions. If we can figure that out, then I feel like maybe we will have solved this. But maybe something crazy is going to happen and there's going to be a whole other thing. But I feel like that's the two main things. Like 7 o'clock is probably who's in charge of all of this. And then what did Jerry and Ronnie know that got them killed? That's the two things I'm going to try and figure out. I am going to read until it feels like we are getting close to the solution. Obviously, at some point at the end of the book, I have recently learned that it's called the denouement. When I feel like we're getting close to that, I'm going to try and stop before I get to that part. I'll give you one final rundown and my theories, and then we'll read the solution and see if I got it right. Okay, you guys. We have a lot to talk about. I accidentally read to the end. I got to a point where I realized I had accidentally started to get some of the solutions, so I figured I'd just finish it. She got me good. Let's talk about it. So where we left off They just had this whole thing happen at George's house. We found out that Bauer is missing. Chapter 24, Bundle's talking to Jimmy, and Jimmy outlines, honestly, a theory that I think is probably the most obvious of ones based off of the information. He says, so Countess is number 1. It all hangs together very well. Number 2, Bauer comes over from Chimneys. He climbs up into O'Rourke's room, knowing that O'Rourke has had a sleeping draught administered to him, and that's the air minister guy. By the Countess somehow or other. The arrangement is that he is to throw the papers to the Countess, who will be waiting below. Then she'll nip back to the library and up to her room. If Bauer's caught leaving the grounds, they'll find nothing on him. Yes, it was a good plan, but it went wrong. No sooner is the Countess in the library than she hears me coming and has to jump behind the screen. Jolly awkward for her, because she can't warn her accomplice. Number 2 pinches the papers, looks out the window, sees, as he thinks, the Countess waiting, pitches the papers down to her, and proceeds to climb down the ivy, where he finds a nasty surprise in the shape of me waiting for him. Pretty nervy work for the Countess waiting behind her screen. All things considered, she told a pretty good story. Yes, it all hangs together very well. Too well, said Bundle decidedly. And I agree. I think that theory just makes too much sense to be where Agatha Christie's going with this. I also tend to rule theories out as soon as somebody in the book mentions them. So those guys are officially off of my list of suspects, which they never really were. And then the other thing that happens in that chapter is Bundle and Bill come inside to find Superintendent Battle looking through a cupboard full of golf clubs. And why is that important? You will find out. But he's searching through this thing, and they're like, are you taking up golf? And he's like, well, maybe. And then we get to chapter 25, which randomly starts with Jimmy proposing to Lorraine, which we've known they had a little bit of something going on this whole time, but he decides to go for it. And it sounds like it's something they've discussed before. And she basically says, now's not the time, presumably because her half-brother just died. And then he mentions something to her about it being helpful to get close to Lady Coote. We don't really know why, but he goes and has a long conversation with her about houses and gets himself invited down to the Cootes over the next weekend. Sir Oswald is really upset about this because Pongo has been telling him that Jimmy is just not someone he should trust. And according to Sir Oswald, Mr. Bateman is always right. And so he's really mad that Lady Coote invited one, but Lady Coote is just gonna get her way. So, chapter 26. Lorraine goes with Bundle back to Chimneys, and they're there for about a week. We kind of have a jump. Lord Caterham is into golf. Sir Oswald also plays. All of a sudden, we're talking about golf a lot. It feels a little random, but I guess it sort of comes into play. Bateman has a golf theory. Everybody's just involved in golf all of a sudden. I don't know. And then Jimmy calls Bundle, wanting to know if she knows how to get hold of skeleton keys. And she's like, why would I know how to do that? And he's like, never mind, I'll figure it out. I need one for when I go down to the Cootes. And then he asks them if they could conveniently stage a breakdown of their car in the nearby town so that they could potentially get invited over to lunch and distract some people while he does some digging. So they agree to do this. There's going to be a whole crew of people at the Cootes, really similar group of people to who was there when Jerry died, and Jimmy's going to do some digging. Chapter 27. One of the interesting things we learned is that Sir Oswald is ambidextrous. That is pointed out very specifically. Jimmy sneaks into Sir Oswald's office at night, digs through all of his drawers using his skeleton key thing that he found. Doesn't find anything, but does run into Pongo also sneaking around with a gun. And Jimmy's like, you could have shot me. And Pongo is like, you're bad for sneaking around. Jimmy makes some excuses, goes back to his room. Nothing much happens there. We get a few chapters like that where just nothing really seems to come up, and it's what does this information mean? Chapter 28, Lorraine and Bundle go and fake the breakdown. They get themselves invited over to lunch. They take Pongo and the air dude off to play a round of golf to distract them so Jimmy has time to go look around. Jimmy found some kind of unknown white powder. He has no idea if it's anything or not, and he won't say where he found it. Not sure why he's all of a sudden being suspicious about that, but And then Bundle has a thought as they're kind of talking through things that they know about, and she really wants to know why Superintendent Battle had Jimmy try on the glove when they were recreating the crime scene. And the solution that they come up with is that the gunman must have been left-handed that was using the glove, because Superintendent Battle had to somehow test out that it was a left-handed glove, but he didn't want to bring it too much to awareness of the other two because they thought he might suspect Sir Oswald. And so he pointed out that it was a little too big, but really what he was doing was having someone try it on with the left hand who it wouldn't be a big deal because Jimmy's right hand was in a sling. Kind of confusing, but at this point, their main suspect is Sir Oswald. So we had a similar suspect going on at that point in the storyline, which is the point at which I ruled him out. Again, once somebody in the book suspects someone, they're off my list of suspects. So I officially removed Sir Oswald and Lady Coot from my list, which basically has me down to Pongo. He's my main suspect. Chapter 29. We get some really random stuff. All of a sudden, everybody's proposing. George, the old dude that nobody likes, stops by to propose to Bundle. And her dad is like, I would have nothing to do with this. My daughter does what she wants. You ask her. When George asks him for permission, he goes to ask Bundle, and Bundle flat out says no and leaves. And he somehow takes this as like she was just confused. She's not sure how she feels about me yet. I'm going to keep trying. And her dad is like, could you not have been clearer? And she was like, I really thought I was. But none of that's super important, really. Mid-proposal, Bill shows up, who we've kind of got an inkling likes Bundle, finds out that the proposal is happening and just leaves. Doesn't try to interrupt it, which is kind of weird, like you think, but he's like acting like he's got something super urgent he needs to tell Bundle, finds out about that, and then is like, never mind, I'm gonna go, and goes to Jimmy's house, where he tells Jimmy that Ronnie's estate just contacted him and said that they had a letter from Ronnie that was supposed to be mailed to him a fortnight after Ronnie's death. And we don't find out what's in the letter. He tells Jimmy, Jimmy makes a plan. Chapter 30, I guess, is where we technically find out that Bundle said no and all of that happens. But they get a call from Jimmy, and he tells them to meet him at 7 Dials. Bring Lorraine, say that you're taking Lorraine home, don't let anyone know where you're going. Meet me at 7 Dials, I have a plan, we are going to figure this thing out. He tells her that Bill just brought him some interesting information. They go. Lorraine and Bundle get rid of Alfred, the like bouncer dude that used to be a footman, tell him to just leave, get out of there, the cops are about to come. So they get rid of him, and then Jimmy and Bill show up. They let Jimmy in while Bill's keeping guard. They go up to look at the cabinet where Bundle had hidden to listen to the original meeting. They go to start emptying the stuff. They're like, this is going to take forever. Just go get Bill. We really don't need him keeping watch. Lorraine comes back and is like, Bill is unconscious in the car. So they go out and they haul Bill back into the building. Jimmy goes to get the doctor. Lorraine is like, I think I have some smelling salts in my bag upstairs. A Bundle goes up to get them. She goes into that like secret back room and gets hit over the head from behind. Chapter 31. I know I'm kind of going through this fast, but really a lot of this just went really fast and there wasn't a ton happening. We get a lot into like proposals and things, and those don't have anything to do with the storyline, really. Chapter 31, Bundle comes awake in Bill's arms as he is like so worried about her, and he proposes. Again, everybody's proposing all of a sudden. She agrees to this one though. There's kind of a long thing of them like going back and forth and him being like, really, do you love me? And she's like, please shut up. We have to figure out how to get out of here. And then the door opens and Mr. Moskarovsky, the 7 Dials owner, comes in. Bill steps in front of her and is like, I've got this. I'll take care of this. And she's like, really? Like, you haven't been the smartest up to this point, but all right. Mr. Moskarovsky takes her to Alfred's room. She's kind of sitting there for a while, trying to figure out like what is going on, trying to piece things together. And then he comes and gets her and brings her back into that secret room and says, you have been invited to a 7 Dials meeting. And she notices that there happens to be somebody sitting in the head chair, number 7 o'clock. And they're going around and they're like, we want you to join 7 Dials. And she's like, why on earth do you think I would possibly join this? And then number 7 o'clock lifts up his mask and it is Superintendent Battle. And this is where everything that I was guessing completely fell apart. That is a twist that I did not see coming. Would I ever have guessed that 7 o'clock was Superintendent Battle? No. So yeah, as you can tell, she got me good, which I'm not even mad about. Like, part of me wants to be able to get it and guess it, but the other part of me is like, it's way more fun to get surprised. Like, so yeah, didn't get it right. Would never have guessed that one. Chapter 32, we get a whole bunch of information about what Seven Dials is. And essentially, Superintendent Battle is like, really, like, secret societies like this don't exist. Like, but they made a fake secret society to basically support the cops and do all of the behind the scenes stuff in the shadows, like a little secret service mini thing under the supervision of Superintendent Battle, basically. And the original founder of Seven Dials, the original 7 o'clock, was Jerry Wade, who is a Secret Service member. Jimmy was right on that one. And he came back and founded Seven Dials. And then we go around and introduce who all of the members of Seven Dials are. Mr. Mobskrovsky, we already knew that. He's part of it, and he's been like the go-between Superintendent Battle and the whole rest of the group. And he's the most valuable secret anti-Bolshevist agent in England. Number 5 is Count Andres of the Hungarian embassy, who happens to be a good friend of Jerry. Number 4 was Mr. Hayward Phelps, an American journalist whose British sympathies are very keen. Number 3 is none other than Bill, who has been in on this thing the whole time. Yeah, I got this so wrong. Number 2 was Ronnie, also part of it, our victim number 2. And number 1 was Jerry. So I guess Jerry wasn't the original 7 o'clock. He's number 1. And then his place was recently taken, and Superintendent Battle says, not without some grave misgivings on my part, by a lady who just so happens to be not only the Countess from the party, but also the actress that Bill was telling her about that one time they went out to dinner that I said I didn't think would be important. Yeah, so she was important. So yes, the Countess did indeed get swapped out by somebody, and it happened to be that actress that Bill had been talking about. So she is the new number 1 o'clock or whatever. So yes, that is the 7 Dials. And then we get our next big surprise. The original object of 7 Dials was to catch one of the most dangerous thieves. Big crook, out for big international stuff. He's already stolen secret inventions twice. Someone with professional inside knowledge. And they have found out that this person is Jimmy, who was never once on my suspect list. So yes, Jimmy is this big international thief who Jerry has been trying to track down for years at this point. And that's where chapter 32 ends. Chapter 33, we get the full in-depth explanation. So many things going on. First off, big point that Superintendent Battle wants to clarify, and where he really got tipped off of what was going on was when Ronnie died, and he said 7 Dials, Jimmy Thesiger. Superintendent Battle basically was like, as someone in the know, I was able to realize that he wasn't trying to get you to tell Jimmy about 7 Dials, he was trying to get you to tell 7 Dials about Jimmy. So basically what it came down to is Jerry had figured out that it was Jimmy, but he hadn't told anyone. And then he happened to let some information leak to Lorraine, which we know he talked to her about it, and he wrote that letter and told her to go back on it. Well, Lorraine, this whole time, has been working with Jimmy. And so she tipped Jimmy off that Jerry knew what was going on. And Jimmy decided to off Jerry. So he killed Jerry by slipping the stuff into his drink before he went upstairs, which is why he was already feeling tired when he started writing to Lorraine. So now we know how Jerry died. Bongo going in and doing all that stuff truly was just part of the prank. He's completely innocent on this. Ronnie kind of figured out what was going on. He's got his suspicions about Jimmy. So later when they're going to tell Lorraine, Ronnie almost tells Jimmy about 7 Dials, but he doesn't. has some misgivings all of a sudden. He goes back and he's the first one to see Jerry's body. And so at that point, Ronnie is the one who goes and rearranges the clocks to leave the message of 7 dials, hoping that he will then be able to rattle somebody and figure out who it was, because he figures out that Jerry must have suspected someone in the house. And so that's how the clocks ended up that way. Jimmy unfortunately did not seem super rattled by it, and so that plan didn't work super great by Ronnie. Bauer, who I thought was accomplice number 1, is actually also put in there by 7 dials, now that we know that Mr. Mozgorovsky was part of this whole plan. He was supposed to be keeping an eye on things and kind of messed up with the whole Jerry thing. Yes, so that was unfortunate. Nobody's still quite sure how Ronnie's death goes down. That's probably the one thing that's left is a bit of a loose end. Presumably Jimmy or Lorraine, one of the two, got him at some point. They're assuming that Ronnie somehow told Lorraine to be careful of Jimmy, and then Lorraine tipped off Jimmy, and that's how Ronnie ended up getting done in. But again, we don't know the full details on that one. And then we get to the night at George's party. And this one gets a little bit crazy. And it's one of those things where I don't think could have put it together necessarily, and I don't think Bundle could have, because we didn't have the information about who was in on it and who wasn't. Superintendent Metal mentions that he feels so bad for Bill because Bill is trying so hard to protect Bundle, but Bundle is working hand in hand with Jimmy, so Bill can't tell her anything because Jimmy's always there. When Jimmy and Bill decide to split the night and take shifts, really what it is Bill and the Countess, aka our actress, are going to split the night, and she gets the first shift. So Bill really is just kind of taking the first half of the night off. She goes down to the library to keep an eye out on things. When Jimmy goes in, he just misses her. She sneaks behind. He doesn't even really think to look. He just doesn't really check. He had set up with Lorraine beforehand to come and meet him at a certain time. So he goes into the library, he locks the door, goes out the window, up the trellis, grabs the stuff because he had already, same thing as what he did with Jerry, slipped some stuff into the one dude's drink before he went up to bed, grabs the stuff, throws it out to Lorraine, who's there at the perfect time, and then goes and climbs back down. What is supposed to happen is that Lorraine takes off, goes out with the stuff, and then Jimmy just stays and they get the things out of there. What they weren't planning on was Lorraine running straight into the arms of Superintendent Battle. At that point, they have to shift gears and make up a story. And so she makes up the story about having come, all the stuff that I told you earlier. Jimmy continues to go back with his original plan where he stages the fight. He goes in, he has his gun that he openly bought, and then he also has a second gun there. He's got a glove on his left hand. He does a whole bunch of shouting in 2 different voices, breaks a bunch of stuff, shoots once with his own gun, and then shoots himself with his other gun with the glove on his hand, throws that gun out of the window, and then pulls the glove off, fakes his painting. When Superintendent Battle gets there, they're trying to figure out how the other person got away so quickly. It's because the other person didn't. It was only one person. Kind of crazy stuff. At that point, you kind of know the gist of what went down. There's a couple of interesting things that Superintendent Battle mentions about how he figured it out. First off, he does mention at some point, and this made me feel very vindicated, that he was also suspicious of Pongo. So it did make me feel good that at one point, Superintendent Battle's top suspect was my top suspect. So I wasn't totally off base here, but the advantage that Superintendent Battle had was that he knew that the Countess was in on it. And so one of the theories that they had was that Lorraine had gotten thrown the stuff because somebody was expecting the Countess to be there and just mistaked them. But Superintendent Battle was like, I knew that couldn't be what happened because I knew that they couldn't have been waiting for the Countess. And so he's then trying to figure out why Lorraine happened to be there at the perfect time. The other thing that tipped him off, and I didn't mention this because I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal, was that he found on that glove teeth mark. And Bundle was correct that we should be suspicious about this glove. But what finally was a break in it for him was that the only reason why there would be teeth marks on this is if somebody had put it on their hand and then couldn't take it off with their other hand and use their teeth to pull the glove off, which would make sense if you were Jimmy, who had just shot yourself through one of your arms and needed to use your teeth to pull the glove off. And then there's a bunch of other information about things that he put together, right? He was looking at the golf clubs because at that point he'd figured out that somebody was left-handed. There's some stuff about how far the gun went. He had Sir Oswald try throwing the gun, and he finally came to the conclusion that it would have been somebody who was right-handed throwing the gun with the left hand. Things like that. All of those little details that Agatha Christie likes to work in got worked in. And then we get to the explanation about what happened just that night that led to Bundle being there. Bill went over to Jimmy's with a fake story about getting a letter from Ronnie. Because again, they now know it's Jimmy and they need to somehow catch him. So Bill goes over. Jimmy tries to poison Bill, just like he did with Jerry and everybody else. Bill, when Jimmy leaves to go call Bundle, he dumps it out and then just kind of fakes the effects until he's faked it enough that Jimmy basically confesses. Jimmy gets him out into the car. They go to meet up with Bundle. At that point, he's already faking asleep in the car. Jimmy thinks that he's already out of it. They go through the whole thing. They haul him in. He's just like faking it this whole time. Bill gets quite the shock when he finds out that Bundle's there. Jimmy and Lorraine go through their whole song and dance. They knock out Bundle. They end up taking Bill and hauling him upstairs into the room, locking him in the room with Bundle. And that's when he quits faking that he's dying and decides to rescue Bundle. Bundle is only alive because Jimmy has an injured arm and didn't think about that, and so it didn't hit her as hard over the head as he thought. And all along, of course, Agatha Christie literally told us the answer in the story. Do you remember when Lady Coot invited Jimmy over and Sir Oswald was super upset about it because Pongo had said that Jimmy couldn't be trusted? Well, Agatha Christie literally told us on multiple occasions that Pongo is always right. And once again, Pongo was right in telling Sir Oswald not to trust Jimmy. And the book ends with Bundle joining the Seven Dials as the new 7 o'clock. So that is the 7 Dial Mystery by Agatha Christie. It definitely got the best of me, for sure. But that was a good one. I enjoyed that. I really wasn't sure where we were going with that at one point. I was very nervous that it was going to become one of the very few Agatha Christie's where it isn't just somebody in the closed cast. I feel like there's just not a lot that she does that, if any. I kind of feel like I read one at one point, but I can't think of which one it was. I feel like there was one book that I felt was like just kind of random, but overall, a very enjoyable read, a very good book. I need to go watch the show now. I don't think I'm gonna like live react, but I'll let you know my thoughts in like typing probably, depending on if I watch it before or after I edit this video. But I can tell you from the first episode, there were some changes that they made, and I'm very curious to see if they kept the same ending or not, because they changed some significant things already in the first episode. And I don't know if I feel like they'd affect the plot. I don't know. Be interesting. Because in like the very first episode, Jerry is like proposes to Bundle. But in the book, Jerry and Bundle never have a romance. Jerry is like about to propose to Lorraine. So I don't know. Interesting stuff that they decided to change. I'm always curious about whether or not they're going to keep the same ending or if they're going to change the ending when they do a like TV version of a mystery book. But this was a really good time. Let me know if you'd like to see more of these videos from me. I definitely will continue to read Agatha Christie and mysteries of all sorts. So let me know what you think. I think the next Agatha Christie that I plan on reading, I believe, is going to be Peril at End House. I think that's the next Poirot that I'm on. So I had a good time with this. I really enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought of this video in this format. And I'm going to go ahead and end it here. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one very soon. Bye.